Story 1. The actual best question someone asked was, if you do spurt inside, what's the probability that she actually gets pregnant and the baby comes to term? The instructor actually had no idea but just told everyone not to do it and that he'd come back next class with some answers. He did, and he told us that the probability of physical relationships at any random time leading to actual pregnancy is quite low. Doing it at a time she's fertile, the stuff actually sticking, everything happening the way it does until the embryo implants itself in the uterine lining, all that, quite low. It's definitely not a guarantee after you do the dirty without a rubber for 3 seconds. He also told us that a lot could go wrong before the 9 months are actually up. Many pregnancies actually end in miscarriages. He said something like 30%. He said that while it might be unlikely for any given time you get frisky to lead to an actual baby, we see it a lot because so many people are doing it. Obviously, you only hear about the times people do have babies without hearing about how many times they did the dirty, for how long, with how many people, and how many failures each person before that had. He said that despite this, you could easily become one of those people, so you should never take a chance regardless. He explained that since the only guaranteed method of preventing pregnancy is abstinence, and even that isn't 100% effective, there is always some risk associated with the act, whether you use protection or not. So the most intelligent thing to do is minimize the risk as much as possible, even if it is not as likely as we originally thought to get someone pregnant. He was a very wise and honest man. He was my life skills instructor. Just for clarification, his reasoning was as follows. Teenagers want to get frisky. They will get frisky. It can lead to pregnancy, and we want to minimize the occurrence of this as much as possible. Since abstinence is off the table for most of them, the next best alternative is to use contraception, even if the probability of getting pregnant from any one activity is individually low. He was teaching us that it was wise to use protection despite the low chance of a baby happening. You gotta love these kinds of teachers. They don't assume to know everything and do their work well. Props to him. Story 2. In life skills class, our teacher had an anonymous question box where the kids could ask a question and the teacher would then read it aloud and answer it. My friend and I always entered insane questions and signed them with our other friend's name, we'll call him Tom. The teacher never read nor answered them, so we had to revise our writing strategy to where the questions were still crazy but slightly believable. Fast forward to the big day. The teacher takes out the slip of paper, reads it to herself, and then says to the class, "Whenever we're all showering, I notice that my dad's thing is way bigger than mine. Will it ever grow or just stay tiny forever?" She looks right at Tom and says something like, "Your time will come." And my friend and I are just sitting there struggling to stifle our laughter, red in the face with tears streaming down our faces. Story 3. Our health teachers do the Dolly Doctor questions and put the answers in a PowerPoint slideshow, so the kids can ask questions without shame and get medically sound information. The teachers also get to laugh hysterically in the staff room. Imagine a conservative religious high school and 2 awkward Australian health teachers. The best questions, verbatim, are, can doing it from the back make a crap hole, baby? Or is a male bean? Teachers don't get any on weekdays because they walk funny afterward. Not exactly a question, hysterical anyway. Why don't men have periods? Why does my mom have a period if she has children? What is walking the dog? How do you play with your member? From the boys' class, do girls get frisky? From the girls' class, do old people still get a chubby? Why do people have to do it? Is it fun? How wet are dreams? Do you wet the bed? Story 4. I went to a Catholic all-boys high school. We used to have life skills taught to us by our gym instructor, who was also a football coach. He used to leave a question box on his desk, and anyone who wanted to ask an anonymous question could write it on a piece of paper, fold it up, and put it in the box. At the beginning of every class, he would randomly select 3 questions out of the box to read, but all sorts of normal questions. Can girls get pregnant from different positions? And how old should I be before I have physical relationships? But the best instance is when he pulled a paper out and read, without hesitation, "Sir, you're cute." The class died laughing. Except for the one student who went red as a beet. Yep, he's the culprit. Story 5. In high school, yes, high school, health, I was doing one of those label the anatomy worksheets in a group, because nothing makes high school health class more fun than forcing us to work in groups, right? This very nice, very intelligent girl in my group was trying to answer one of the questions and said out loud the word for a woman's private parts. She sounded very unsure of herself and pronounced it vagina. I was awestruck. How does a woman make it this far into her life without knowing how to pronounce the name of what she has down there? She was a native English speaker, and we were in a mostly white Midwestern public school. I knew her growing up, and she wasn't even particularly sheltered. Just didn't know how to pronounce the word. Story 6. A 7th grade life skills class was taught by a nun who clearly had no idea about it. A boy in the class legitimately asked how gay people do it, and no one in the class knew. This was in a time frame before doing it from the back was mainstream, and the general public perception was that it was gay, and therefore a sign of it if a hetero man was to be interested in such a thing. I legit believed that no one in the class knew because I looked around to see if anyone was smirking or looking guilty, and everyone had the same open curiosity look on their face. The nun's answer was perfect. "Well, I don't know, but I believe that gay men have an extra hole between their backside and their nuts." This didn't sound right to any of us, but none of us knew enough to debate it. I can only imagine that every single boy in the class checked that night. It must have been a massive relief, especially to the ones who were gay. Story 7. When I was in 7th grade life skills class, one of the female teachers jokingly said that they wanted to sew up their daughter's lady parts to keep them from getting pregnant. My response was to raise my hand and ask, "But how would they take a whiz?" One of the most popular girls in the grade responded, "Wrong hole." And that's how I learned that girls have 3 holes and men have 2. This was an auditorium discussion with my entire grade of 300-ish people. I spent the next 5 years with them. It never came up, but I've never forgotten. I like to think I helped all the other guys realize something. Sure, he can keep telling himself that. Girl 1, this kid 0. Story 8. Teacher. Anytime a man's liquid enters the woman, she's at risk of pregnancy. Kid. What if she's on birth control? Teacher. There's still a risk. Kid. What if you're getting frisky and then you release it into one girl's mouth and then she passes it onto another girl's mouth and they spit it into each other's lady bits? Could they both get pregnant? Teacher. Story 9. In 4th grade, they separated all the boys and girls into 2 separate classrooms for the old talk. They presented some diagrams. Obviously, there were chuckles around the room and questions were asked like, how did Freddie Mercury die? After they realized that many of the students thought the entire escapade was a joke, our teacher asked us to write down any additional questions we might have and to pass them forward. I'm guessing so as to not waste time entertaining us street smart children. The first question was read aloud. What's a chubby? And I'll never forget this kid who always got picked on. He immediately sighed and embarrassingly exclaimed, I didn't know you'd read it out loud. It was so classic. Story 10. Is it okay to let my buddy use the same rubber after I do? This is the question that should have been asked before a kid actually did it and was later stuck with a child support case involving his buddy's girlfriend. The story as I heard it goes like this. 2 young couples were having a good time with their significant others, but only one had a... The first guy, safely, finishes with his girl, then gives the used rubber to his buddy who turns it inside out and proceeds with his girl. Seems safe, right? Buddy was Buddy 1 who got stuck with a paternity test. Lesson learned, Buddy 1's crash course in child support. If you enjoyed that tale, give that like button a friendly tap and hit subscribe to my channel for more wild life lessons. Story 11. We had this mildly autistic kid in our class, super happy, nice, upbeat, and everything. He always volunteered as a really nice kid. During class when we were being taught how to put a rubber on and the instructor asked for a volunteer, no surprise, he volunteered. He saunters up to the front, grabs the rubber, starts to unwrap it and asks, So, do I eat it now? And moves to put the rubber in his mouth. The instructor was like, No, Aaron, please put it on the banana, and very visibly tried to hold back a laugh. He forces it on backward, blows out the other side of the rubber, walks back to his seat with the ripped rubber on the banana, and keeps it for the rest of the class while everyone tries their hardest not to fall into hysterics. The teacher took it back at the end of class. Story 12. So my high school life skills class had anonymous questions every class or so. This consisted of people writing down questions. Well, anonymously, and the teacher would read them aloud to the next class and answer them. However, being high schoolers, most, were a little off. Is a solid kick to the stomach a viable method of termination? If I'm caught playing with myself during a test, does that count as cheating? Why did God make me gay? Is a Snickers wrapper an appropriate substitute for a rubber? This was read by a visiting expert in birth control. Have you ever gotten a Cleveland steamer while riding a train through Cleveland? Dang, high school could stink, but I sure miss it sometimes. Story 13. I actually got something. In class we were going over the sperm and the journey to the egg, and one of the reasons the sperm has difficulty accomplishing that was due to the acid inside the lady bits. So I raised my hand and asked, well, if the lady bits have acid, why don't girls' fingers get burned off? The whole class started laughing and the teacher, who was a guy, had to catch his breath. That's when I learned about chemistry and the different levels of acid and base. Story 14. In high school, my life skills teacher was talking about the different ways people have to make love. She went on to tell the class that men's liquid is a mixture of proteins and sugars. My classmate asked, So, is it like sweet? My teacher was half a second from answering till she got red. She was a fair-skinned black lady, in the face and just chose not to answer at all. Boy, the whole class would have died if she did, though. Story 15. Kid. Why do people make noise while, Teacher. Why do people go, when they enjoy their morning cereal? I just remember the class freaking out. Ooh, that's why. Story 16. 7th grade life skills day, boys and girls segregated. This was asked in the boys section. Q. What is the G-spot? A, female science teacher. It's right here. Points to the spot in a huge poster of the female organ on the board, and it feels really good when someone stimulates it. Most useful geography lesson we ever had. Story 17. We had a box where everyone could write questions on a piece of paper and the teacher would read them to the class so it was anonymous. One of the questions was, Can you get pregnant from swallowing? Immediately a girl towards the back of the room began to slouch in her chair. Her face got red and her boyfriend all of a sudden got a huge smile on his face. Story 18. Not life skills class, but there was an outbreak of crabs in my high school. We were all marched to the theater class by class for information sessions. The principal was an older gentleman and asked, at the conclusion, if there were any questions. One kid raises his hand and the following exchange takes place. Student. Are they genetic? Principal. What? Cupping his ear. S. Can you inherit crabs? Are they genetic? P. What did he say? S. Yelling. Are they in your genes? Followed by 5 minutes of the principal laughing his head off. So that's why he was the one rounding off the discussions. That principal was the culprit. Story 19. There was a kind of special kid in our class, let's call him Kyle. Anyway, long story short, the nurse who was in charge of the lesson started talking about hardness. While Kyle stood up on his chair and pointed to his pants, where you could see a bulge, he then yelled out, "Like this?" The poor nurse just looked at everyone in the class, and after about a minute of silence, everyone burst out in laughter. Kyle thought that everyone was laughing with him, so he started taking off his pants. And that's when the nurse or teachers ran over and removed him from the room. I still love this story, but boy did I feel bad for the nurse. Story 20. In my 8th grade health class, one of the anonymous questions was, "Can you get pregnant from doing it from the back?" The teacher then said, "Yes, it's no different than doing it the regular way." I live in Utah, so I don't know if my teacher was horribly misinformed or if she was just worried that if she said no, there would be an influx of middle schoolers getting creative with our physical relations. Also, in the same class, we were having another question session where people just raised their hands and said it out loud. The class a-hole, the kid who thinks he's the coolest thing ever, but he's an annoying a-hole that everyone in the class hates, asked, "Why does it hurt when you bend your member?" A good 3/4 of the class laughed at him, and it felt so good. Story 21. Not a question, but I remember in 7th grade life science class we had reached the infamous life skills segment of the course, and the class always seemed one step away from erupting into giggly, pubescent anxiety-fueled chaos. That day came when we were discussing the relevant human anatomy in the nether regions of our bodies. We had an incredibly informative diagram of someone's in the projector at the front of the room, and our cheerful and unshakable teacher pointed to it and asked us, "Can anyone tell me what the name is for the area between the genitals and the poop hole?" I will never forget when from the back of the class came the words, "No man's land." Story 22. So the life skills teacher told us that after a vasectomy, a guy still has something like 80 loads still active in him. My buddy looks over at the other teacher and says, I can knock that out in a weekend. We lost it. Story 23. Kids submit questions beforehand with a promise that I'll answer everything. Kid, what's a 72? I spent an hour looking up everything I could to see if this was some new term I wasn't familiar with. Me, the number between 71 and 73. Did you mean 69? Kid, yeah, that's the one. Either that kid was messing with a teacher or he genuinely didn't know. I doubt that. Story 24. One of the students in my class asked, "Why do girls get soaked before getting frisky?" Our teacher, whom I don't believe has ever done it, explained that only men enjoy getting frisky, and that in order to get women to go along with it, when they sensed that a stiff member was nearby, the woman's lady bits would get soaked. That liquid would cause the woman's lady parts to get itchy, but they were in luck because here comes the big scratcher, and that's why. I believed that crazy stuff until high school. I was so embarrassed when I was making out with my first serious girlfriend and asked her, "Are you getting itchy down there?" I will never forget the look on her face she gave me that day. Needless to say, she was not itchy after that. Story 25. Life skills teacher. Physical relations are not the same thing as love. You love your mom, right? Student. I love my dog. Story 26. This was more like the best question that never got asked. The class was watching this video about puberty titled, "What's Happening to Me?" An animation of a guy on a diving board appeared, followed by him suddenly getting a stiffness combined with ping sound effects. Right on cue with his ping chubby, the quiet guy sitting at the back of the class suddenly stood up. No sign of emotion on his face as he stood there. I thought he was about to deliver a speech or something. He then casually pushed over his desk, sending pencil cases and books flying everywhere, and he fell to the ground. Story 27. 5th grade. We were allowed to blurt out questions. The teacher talks about how physical relationships mean different things to different people. What does it mean when daddy ties up mommy and uses his belt on her like he does on me when I'm in trouble? They're having fun, but she's getting punished? What does that mean? I kid you not. Chad had the best things to say sometimes. Story 28. In my class, we had an anonymous question period where we wrote down questions on note cards and brought them to our teacher. He'd shuffle the cards and read them out loud with the hopes that we'd all be able to learn something from our classmates' questions and concerns. Obviously, some kids took advantage of the anonymous aspect and wrote whatever they wanted. One day, he picked a card and burst into laughter. The question was, how many men can fit into a whale's lady parts? Story 29. The teacher was explaining male-female reproduction. Student 1. Hey, why would you want to do that? Student 2. What are you, gay? Student 1. Yep. The kid came out in the middle of life skills class. The teacher handled it really well, but the students did not do so much. Props to the kid for having the guts to come out like that. An award is in order too for his creativity. Story 30. The girl asked, what are the medical risks of blue balls? Is it true there can be long-term damage? Teacher. What? No, none. Huh? Several guys in the class. No, why would you tell them that? Story 31. When informed that the volume of a man's liquid is about a teaspoon, one boy did the math in his head and shouted, there's 96 to a pint. Story 32. I remember from my 8th grade life skills course that this one kid was hanging out to ask the teacher questions after the sections on and other genital-related diseases. I recall the teacher having a very concerned and alarmed look on her face. The kid wasn't in school for a couple of weeks after. Turns out he had done the self-exam and found a lump. They caught testicular cancer early on and he's fine. Down one nut if I recall. Story 33. Not a life skills class, but seems like it'd fit in this thread. My mom told me about a time she was days away from giving birth to me in the summer heat. She went to a public pool to cool off and get some baby pressure off of her hips. A group of teenage girls noticed how pregnant she was and sat next to her asking questions about the baby. After a few minutes, my mom gets up to get in the pool. One of the girls hops up, looking visibly frightened, and asks my mom, "Aren't you worried you're going to drown your baby?" Story 34. Not the teacher, but a bystander. When I was in 8th grade, we had this health teacher who was generally liked and considered to be hot. He was probably in his late 20s, so we do the reproductive unit and he throws in at the end that it is best to wait until marriage to fool around. Pretty sure he had to say that. This girl on a dare raised her hand, looked him dead in the eye and said, "You didn't do that though, did you?" It was so funny, but looking back, I feel bad for him. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you made it this far, I'm sure you'll also enjoy. Waiters, what seriously fucked up things have you overheard? Story 4 is so wild. See you in that video.